The house where it would all begin did not look like a place where anything horrible could happen. It stood on a quiet street in the heart of Victorian London, surrounded by trimmed hedges and tall iron gates that never seemed to rust. In the early mornings, fog wrapped itself around the rooftops like a blanket, softening the sharp corners of the city and hiding the dirt beneath its calm surface. Horse carts rattled over the cobblestones, children chased each other down narrow lanes, and neighbors nodded politely as they passed. It was a time when everyone pretended life was tidy and controlled, even when it was not. Behind closed doors, people carried secrets that never fit the world they showed outside. Inside the household, everything looked perfect at first glance. The halls smelled faintly of lavender oil, and every painting hung perfectly straight. Servants moved quietly through the rooms, their steps soft on polished floors. The lamps burned with a warm golden glow each evening, giving the house a gentle, peaceful look that fooled even those who felt something was wrong. Anyone visiting would leave thinking this was a home full of order and comfort, a place where nothing bad could take root. But sometimes calm places hide the deepest cracks, and sometimes the people who appear the most steady are the ones holding everything together by force. The family's doctor often came and went through the side entrance, carrying his small leather bag and moving with the calm confidence people trusted in those days. He was the kind of man others looked to for answers, someone who spoke softly and rarely raised his voice. Many believed he had a gift for understanding pain, both of the body and the mind. People admired him, even his certainty. But those who watched him closely noticed something else beneath the surface, an intensity that never left his eyes, a hunger for control disguised as concern. He was the sort of man who liked having power, and once he had it, he did not let go easily. Then there was the young woman at the center of it all, though no one would have guessed she was headed toward tragedy. Her name was whispered in admiration by those who knew her. She carried herself with quiet grace, moving through the world as if she hoped not to disturb it. There was something soft in her presence, something that made people want to protect her. She had been raised in comfort but not in warmth, surrounded by people yet always somewhat alone. Her life looked peaceful from the outside. Afternoon teas, piano lessons, long walks through the gardens behind her home. But there were days when she lingered too long by her window, staring at nothing, her thoughts drifting to places she never spoke about. Her parents were respected, wealthy enough to avoid trouble and distant enough to miss what was happening right under their noses. They saw her as fragile, someone who needed guidance, someone who should trust the people chosen to care for her. They believed the doctor was doing just that. They liked the way he spoke, steady voice, careful words. They liked how he always seemed to know the right thing to say. They never wondered what he kept from them or why their daughter's smile slowly disappeared over the months. A maid in the household noticed more than she ever dared to say. She saw how the doctor lingered too long during his visits, how the young woman tensed whenever he stepped into the room. She saw how he placed his hand on the girl's shoulder with a kind of intimacy that did not fit the situation. But she also knew her place. In a home like this, servants were expected to lower their eyes, to stay quiet even when they sensed danger. In those days, truth had a price many people could not afford. Life moved along with its usual rhythms, the morning bell for breakfast, the quiet afternoons, the distant sounds of coaches outside. To anyone observing from a distance, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But if someone paid close attention, they would notice signs that something heavy hung in the air. The young woman's laughter came less often. The doctor's visits grew more frequent. And behind the locked doors of her room, she wrote pages in her journal, her handwriting growing shaky, the ink smudged where her hand trembled. People in that era believed strongly in appearance. They hid fear behind polite smiles and covered grief with fine clothes. But no amount of lace or velvet could hide the tension inside the house. The unease began small, like the faint creak of a floorboard in a silent room. Then it grew into something that touched everyone, even if they didn't yet understand why. The girl felt it every time she heard the doctor's footsteps approaching. The maid felt it when she found wilted flowers that had been crushed in the girl's hands. And the doctor himself felt it, though in a very different way. Something twisted inside him, something that fed on control and restraint, something he did not try to fight. No one could have known that this calm, fog-covered street would soon become the center of one of the most disturbing cases in medical history. No one could have guessed that a story was already unfolding behind those elegant walls, a story filled with fear, power, and a young woman trapped in a life she hadn't chosen. Everything looked normal, but the truth had already begun to rot beneath the surface. And when the world finally learned what happened inside that house, they would never look at it, or at the doctor who walked through its doors, the same way again. The change began slowly, almost so quietly that no one noticed at first. It started with the way the doctor spoke to her, his voice softer than before, almost whisper-like, as if he were sharing a secret no one else deserved to hear. He would step closer than necessary, his hand hovering near her arm even when there was no reason to touch her. She tried to ignore it in the beginning. She told herself she was imagining things, that it was only her own worry twisting harmless moments into something darker. But as the weeks passed, those moments grew sharper, harder to dismiss. He watched her with an attention that felt heavy, a kind of gaze that didn't match the role he was supposed to play. She felt it like a hand pressing against her ribs, making it hard to breathe. Her mother didn't see any of it. She only saw the doctor's polished manners and calm voice. She trusted him the way most people trusted men in his position. In that time, a doctor's word carried weight. His presence was seen as reassurance, a sign that everything would soon return to normal. So when he suggested more frequent visits, saying the young woman needed close care, her mother agreed without a second thought. She paid no mind to the way her daughter's eyes dropped to the floor at his suggestions, or how she pulled her hands into her sleeves as if trying to hide herself from him. The girl's father was even more detached. He spent most days behind closed doors, handling business matters that took him between London and the countryside. Money was the center of his world. His mind was always on investments, deals, and quiet talks with men who filled his pockets while emptying his time. He wasn't unkind, just distant. He believed he had given his daughter everything she needed, a fine home, proper clothes, and education. He didn't see that the one thing she had always wanted from him was the one thing he believed had no place in their world: his genuine attention. It was that loneliness, that deep ache inside her that the doctor recognized before anyone else. He saw how easily she bent to others' expectations, how desperately she tried not to cause trouble. That quiet compliance drew him in. It fed something in him that had remained hidden for years, a desire not just to guide someone but to control them, to own their fear, their trust, their every step. He masked this hunger behind gentle words, careful touches, and long sessions where he insisted he was helping her, even though each treatment left her feeling more trapped than before. One afternoon, after a long session behind her locked door, she went to her room and cried silently into her pillow. She didn't know why she was crying. She only knew she felt wrong, like her life was closing around her inch by inch. She wrote in her journal that night, her hand shaking as she confessed to the pages what she couldn't say aloud. "I feel like there is someone in the room even when I'm alone." Around this time, the maid began noticing small things. A broken teacup in the girl's room, a bruise on her wrist that she quickly covered with her sleeve, a look in her eyes that reminded the maid of a bird trapped in a cage. She wanted to speak up, but every time she gathered the courage, she remembered how easily servants were dismissed in households like this. Saying the wrong thing could cost her everything: her job, her home, her reputation. Still, something inside her tightened each time she saw the doctor's carriage arrive. She began lingering near the hallway when he visited, searching for any sign that her worries were real, even though she already knew they were. The pressure outside the house grew too. London was in one of its restless phases, the kind that made the rich uneasy. A recession had left business owners nervous, including her father, who had begun losing money faster than he could replace it. He became short-tempered, his voice louder than usual. The girl heard her parents arguing late at night, their words too muffled to understand but filled with heat. Her mother cried more. Her father slammed doors. And in the middle of this chaos, the doctor became the only steady figure her mother relied on. That dependency only increased his influence. He began suggesting new treatments, new medicines, new routines that kept the girl isolated from friends and neighbors. He said her condition was delicate. He said she needed calm surroundings. He said too much excitement could trigger dangerous episodes. Her mother repeated his words without question. Soon, the girl was spending full days inside the house, often alone except for the doctor's visits. She felt her world shrinking to the four walls around her. It didn't help that she had secrets of her own. Before the doctor's visits became frequent, she had been quietly writing letters to a young man she met during a visit to the countryside months before. He was kind, steady, someone she could talk to without fear of being judged. He wasn't wealthy or powerful, but he listened to her, really listened. She kept their letters hidden under a loose floorboard in her room. They were filled with dreams of escape, of a simple life far from London's expectations. She never intended to act on those dreams, not really, but they gave her something precious: hope. Then one day, the doctor found a letter. She didn't know how he discovered it. Maybe he had been searching through her things when she wasn't looking. Maybe he had simply noticed the floorboard that rose slightly higher after she put something beneath it. When he confronted her, he held the letter between two fingers as if it were something dirty. His voice stayed calm, but beneath that calm she heard something terrible, a bitterness that chilled her spine. He told her the young man was a danger to her. He said she was too innocent to understand his intentions. He said she needed someone wiser, someone who could protect her from making mistakes that would ruin her life. When she tried to take the letter back, he grabbed her wrist harder than necessary. She gasped, pain flashing up her arm. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time she glimpsed the truth behind his calm smile. This was not a man who healed. This was a man who possessed. After that day, the doctor changed. His visits became longer, his presence more controlling. He insisted she share every thought with him, every feeling. He told her that secrets were dangerous, that trust between a patient and doctor must be complete. She had no one to turn to. Her father was gone most nights. Her mother was too overwhelmed with their financial troubles to notice her daughter's fear. And the doctor used this stress to draw the mother closer, often staying for late-night discussions under the excuse of managing the girl's condition. The household grew heavier each week. When the doctor walked in, servants lowered their eyes in silence. When he left, the girl flinched at every sound, afraid he had returned. She began waking from nightmares, convinced she heard his footsteps outside her room. The maid found her shaking one morning, unable to speak, unable to explain why she felt so lost. The maid wanted to hold her, to tell her she wasn't imagining the danger, but the rules of the house kept her hands at her sides. The girl's mother, worn down by worry and the fear of losing her status in society, accepted the doctor's guidance blindly. She was too exhausted to see how far he had crossed the line. She believed he was the only person who understood her daughter's troubles. The more she leaned on him, the more he used her trust to tighten his control. Behind his composed exterior, the doctor was fighting his own hidden demons. He carried memories from his childhood, dark, twisted ones he had never spoken aloud. Growing up in a home ruled by a father with violent moods, he had learned early that power was the only way to be safe. He had learned to mask fear with coldness, to hide terror beneath silence. Over the years, that survival instinct turned into something else, something he no longer questioned. A need to command, to shape others, lives according to his will. The girl was the perfect target, lonely, gentle, and raised to obey. His obsession with her deepened each day. The idea of losing her, especially to another man, sent ripples of anger under his calm surface. He convinced himself he was protecting her, that he understood her better than anyone else, that she needed him. In truth, he needed her far more than she ever needed him. The girl's only shred of hope came from the letters she continued to write in secret, though she had no way to send them. She kept them hidden in different places now, terrified he would find them again. Writing gave her a moment of peace, a space where she could breathe freely, but even that peace was slipping away. Her handwriting grew shaky. Her sentences turned into desperate pleas she didn't dare speak aloud. As winter approached, the tension in the house sharpened like ice. The cold crept into the halls, into the corners of rooms, into the girl's bones. She felt herself fatting, her voice swallowed by the doctor's grip on her life. Every visit took a piece of her. Every quiet threat disguised as concern pushed her further into despair. But the doctor felt the shift too. He sensed she was beginning to resist him, even in small ways, a step back when he approached, a quiet no when he insisted on another session, a flicker of strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. That flicker frightened him. It told him he might lose the control he believed he deserved. And the idea of losing her drove him toward a choice he had never imagined making, one that would change the house forever. Each day was now a countdown to something none of them could name, but all of them felt. The maid's hands shook as she poured tea. The mother wrung her fingers until they turned white. The girl hardly slept. And the doctor, beneath his calm exterior, burned with a twisted certainty that whatever came next would bind her to him forever. No one knew it yet, but the house had already stepped past the point of safety. The rising tension was no longer something that could be ignored. It was a quiet storm spreading through every room, waiting for the moment when one final act would break everything beyond repair. The night it happened began like so many others, too quiet, too heavy, the kind of night when the air itself feels tense, as if it knows what the people inside the house refuse to see. A cold rain tapped against the windows, steady and sharp, the sort of sound that makes a person feel trapped. The lamps flickered with every draft that pushed through the hallways, and the fire in the sitting room burned low, giving off more shadow than light. It was the kind of night when secrets came alive. She had spent the entire day feeling watched. It hadn't just been her imagination. The doctor had arrived earlier than usual unannounced, insisting he needed to check on her after a troubling week. His eyes followed her everywhere she moved, controlled and calculating. Even when he smiled, she felt no warmth from him, only pressure, only want, only something cold tightening around her life. Her mother tried to greet him politely, but the strain in her voice was obvious. The financial worry had aged her in only a few months. She looked small, fragile, desperate for stability. She clung to the doctor's reassurances like a drowning person grasping at anything floating nearby. When he asked to speak with her privately in the study, she agreed. She didn't see the way the girl tensed, didn't see how she pulled back toward the wall as if trying to disappear. While they were gone, the girl hurried to her room. She locked the door and dug out the unfinished letter she had hidden behind the back panel of her dresser. Her hands shook so badly that the paper tore slightly. She stared at the words she had written, words filled with fear, hope, and a last, desperate wish for someone to save her. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the letter to her chest. She didn't know if she meant it for the young man anymore, or if she meant it for anyone who might listen, anyone who might care. Downstairs, voices rose behind the study door, not loud enough to hear the words, but sharp enough that the maid paused at the end of the hall. The doctor's voice was tight, angry in a way he rarely allowed to show. The mother's voice trembled as if she didn't know what she was agreeing to anymore. When the door finally opened, the maid stepped back into the shadows. The doctor walked out first, smoothing his coat, his face calm again, but the calm didn't sit right. It looked forced, stretched too tightly over something boiling underneath. He went straight upstairs. The girl heard his footsteps long before he reached her door. Her heart hammered in her chest. She wiped her tears and scrambled to hide the letter, but her hands were clumsy. She pushed it into the back of a drawer and backed away, her breath stuck in her throat. He didn't knock. He used the spare key her mother had given him weeks earlier. The door swung open, and when she saw him standing there, wet from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes intense, she felt her legs weaken. He shut the door behind him slowly, like he wasn't entering a room but sealing off an escape. "You've been avoiding me," he said, no softness in his voice now. She shook her head, but the denial wouldn't form into words. He stepped closer, his boots leaving small puddles on the floor. His eyes darted around the room, sharp, searching, checking for signs of betrayal. When his gaze landed on the dresser, she felt her stomach drop. It was like he could smell the truth, the way an animal senses fear. He moved toward it. She rushed to block him, standing between him and the drawer. She didn't know where the courage came from, maybe from the thought of losing the last thing that made her feel human. Maybe from the growing fear that if she didn't resist now, she never would again. "Move," he said quietly, dangerously. She shook her head again, this time firm. Something cracked inside him. In one sudden motion, he grabbed her by the arm and pulled her away. She cried out, stumbling backward. He yanked the drawer open so hard it nearly came off its track. He found the letter within seconds. When he turned toward her, holding it up, his face twisted with something she had never seen before, jealousy, rage, betrayal, all tangled together. "You still think about him?" he said, his voice shaking. "After everything I've done for you." She backed away until her spine hit the wall. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "give it back." "Is he the reason you've been resisting me?" His voice grew louder, rougher. "You think he can protect you? You think he understands you better than I do?" She cried harder, not knowing what to say that wouldn't make him explode further. She didn't understand how a man who pretended to care for her could hold so much anger. She didn't understand how she had missed the signs for so long. He stepped closer, cornering her. The room felt smaller with each step he took. The walls seemed to close in, the air turning thin and sharp. She pressed herself against the wallpaper as if it could swallow her whole. "I won't let him take you away from me," he hissed. In that moment, something in her finally snapped too, not with violence, but with a sudden, overwhelming need to survive. She tried to run. She darted toward the door, her hand reaching for the knob, but he grabbed her from behind. She screamed, a sound that echoed through the house in a way that made the maid freeze where she stood downstairs. The doctor clamped his hand over the girl's mouth, dragging her backward, his other hand gripping her arm with crushing force. "Stop fighting me," he growled. "You're making this worse." She struggled harder, her nails scratching at his hands. His mask of calm shattered completely. Panic mixed with fury in his eyes. He wasn't thinking of consequences anymore. He wasn't thinking at all. He felt her slipping away, not from his arms, but from his control, and losing control was the one thing he could not accept. In the struggle, they crashed into the dresser. A glass bottle toppled and shattered on the floor. She kicked at him, desperate, terrified, gasping for air. He tightened his grip around her throat, not enough to kill, at least not yet, but enough to silence her, to force her still. She clawed at his sleeves, her vision blurring. "Why won't you just listen to me?" He spat, his voice breaking. His fingers pressed harder, her eyes widened, her body jerked with panic. He didn't mean for it to go that far, not at first. But panic has a way of twisting a person's mind. His breath came fast, wild. His hands shook, but he didn't release her. He couldn't. The more she fought, he held on. Her knees buckled, her lips parted, a quiet, choking sound escaping. "Please," she tried to whisper. It was the last clear sound she made. Her body went limp. His hand stayed around her throat for a moment longer, not realizing or refusing to believe what he had done. When he finally let go, she collapsed onto the floor, her hair spread like a dark halo, her eyes half open but unfocused. He stared at her, frozen. The rain outside beat harder against the windows. The lamps flickered again, throwing strange shadows across the walls. The world felt distant, muffled. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, you're just fainting, you always faint." But this time, she didn't get back up. His breath quickened as the truth began to claw its way into his mind. He knelt beside her, shaking her shoulders gently at first, then harder. "Wake up," he begged. "Please wake up." But her body didn't respond. Her chest didn't rise, her lips stayed still. He pressed his fingers to her neck, no pulse. A horrifying silence filled the room. Something in him collapsed then, a hollow cracking sound deep inside, like the breaking of something he didn't know he had left. He staggered back, pressing his hand against his mouth. For a moment, he considered calling for help. But then he remembered the look on her mother's face lately, the trust, the desperation. He remembered the girl's father and how quickly he could destroy a man's life with a single accusation. He remembered his reputation, the power he had worked his whole life to earn. He told himself it was an accident. He told himself he had only meant to stop her from running. He told himself she would still be alive if she hadn't struggled so much. Lies came easier than the truth. His mind switched from panic to something cold and strategic. He wiped her face, closed her eyes, straightened her dress. His hands trembled, but he forced them to keep moving. He looked around the room, searching for anything that might show there had been a struggle. The broken glass, the knocked-over chair, the bruises on her neck. He told himself he could fix all of it. Downstairs, the maid finally dared to move. She had heard the scream. She had heard the crash. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stairs. But when she reached the hallway, the doctor stepped out of the girl's room, pulling the door closed behind him. His face was pale, too pale. "She needs rest," he said, his voice steady but his eyes too still. "Do not disturb her." Something in his tone froze the maid in place. He passed her without another word, his wet boots leaving faint marks on the floor. She watched him go, a sick feeling spreading through her chest. She didn't know what had happened behind that door, not yet. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something in the house had changed forever. And nothing would ever return to the way it had been. For the rest of the night, the house stayed strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful but hollow, like something has been ripped out of it. The doctor left with hurried steps, almost tripping over the rug in the entryway, and he didn't look back once. He kept his coat pulled tight around him as he walked into the storm, the rain swallowing him up. From the upstairs hall, the maid watched him go, her fingers trembling against the railing. Something inside her whispered that the house was no longer a safe place, that whatever might have happened behind that closed door was not something that could be undone. She waited until she could no longer hear the sound of his boots on the pavement, then slowly climbed the stairs again. She hesitated outside the girl's room, remembering the sharp edge in the doctor's voice when he told her not to disturb her. But her fear of disobeying was nothing compared to the fear of what might be waiting inside. Her hand shook as she pushed open the door. The sight of the girl lying on the floor stopped her breath. The maid dropped to her knees beside her, calling her name softly at first, then louder. Her hands hovered above the girl's shoulders, too afraid to touch her, too afraid of what her touch would confirm. When she finally pressed her fingers against the girl's wrist, she felt nothing, no pulse. The truth hit her so hard it felt like a blow to the chest. Tears blurred her vision as she placed a trembling hand on the girl's cold cheek, hopping, begging for any sign of life. But the silence in the room answered for her. She stumbled backward, her sobs echoing off the walls. In the next moment, she was running down the stairs, through the hall, calling for the girl's mother with a voice that shook so violently it barely sounded like her own. The girl's mother appeared at the top of the staircase, her hands gripping the railing as if she needed help holding herself up. Her breath came unevenly. She had been packing the study ever since the doctor left, trying to calm her nerves, telling herself his anger earlier had only come from worry. She had no idea what waited upstairs. When she saw the maid's face, all the color drained from her own. "What happened?" she whispered, though a part of her already feared the answer. The maid could only shake her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's her, she's not breathing." The mother didn't scream, she didn't collapse, she simply froze, her legs refusing to move. For a brief second, she hoped she had misheard, hoped the maid was wrong, hoped her daughter was sleeping, fainted, anything but what those words implied. But when she finally reached the room and saw her daughter lying still on the floor, a small, broken sound escaped her lips, the kind of sound a person makes when something inside them tears apart. She dropped beside her daughter, touching her face, brushing the hair from her forehead, whispering her name over and over. Her hands shook as she tried to lift her daughter's limp body into her lap. She cried so hard she could barely breathe, the pain ripping through her in waves. She pressed her forehead against her daughter, rocking slightly as if she could somehow bring her back to life. The girl's father arrived home minutes later. The moment he stepped through the door, he knew something terrible had happened. The house felt wrong, too dark, too heavy, too still. When he found his wife on the bedroom floor, holding their daughter, his entire world collapsed. He knelt beside them, his face pale, his hands unsteady. He didn't ask what happened, not at first. He didn't want to speak the fear already forming in his mind. Only later, when the doctor's name slipped from the maid's lips, did his grief twist into something darker. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Servants carried whispers from house to house. By the time dawn broke, people gathered outside the home, sharing theories in hushed tones. Some claimed the girl had been ill for weeks. Others hinted that she had taken her own life. A few whispered the doctor's name, uncertain but uneasy, remembering the way he had lingered around the home more often than seemed necessary. When the police arrived later that morning, the doctor was already preparing his story. He had barely slept, packing his own home like a trapped animal. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, pale, frightened, fatting. He heard her choking, her desperate gasps. He told himself it hadn't been his fault, that she had panicked, that she had been weak, that he had only tried to calm her. He repeated it like a prayer, trying to drown out the truth that clawed at the edges of his mind. He told himself he was a respected doctor, a man of standing. People trusted him. They needed him. The family had relied on him. He was not a monster. He was not a killer. By the time the officers knocked on his door, he had wrapped himself in these lies so tightly that he almost believed them. When asked about his last visit to the house, he spoke calmly, with steady hands and a voice that never trembled. He said she had been distressed, that he worried about her mental state, that she had seemed fragile and lost. He claimed he left her resting peacefully. He looked the officers in the eyes with the confidence of a man who had spent years hiding behind charm and authority. Still, cracks appeared in his mask. One of the officers noticed the scratch marks on his wrist. Another noticed the cut on his knuckle. The doctor blamed the storm, slipped on the pavement, a simple accident. He even smiled politely as he said it. But others didn't believe him. The girl's father refused to accept anything the doctor said. He asked again and again for details, for explanations, for answers that could bring even a sliver of clarity. But the doctor offered only polished words and practiced pity. The mother, too broken to speak much, watched him with a hollow stare. She had trusted him. She had believed he was helping her daughter. Now, as she sat trembling beside her child's still body, her grief slowly began to harden into anger. In the days that followed, the community grew divided. Some insisted the doctor was innocent, that such a good man would never harm a patient. Others recalled uneasy moments, unsettling glances, things they had ignored at the time. Newspapers picked up the story, filling columns with dramatic headlines and exaggerated rumors. Some reporters painted the doctor as a tragic figure overwhelmed by a patient's decline. Others painted him as a villain hiding behind a gentle facade. The maid was questioned repeatedly. Her story stayed the same each time, the scream, the crash, the doctor's cold expression when he told her not to disturb the girl. She confessed how uneasy she had felt for months, how she had sensed something wrong but feared speaking up. The guilt ate away at her day by day. She avoided the girl's room, unable to bear the sight of it. At night, she cried quietly in her small bed, blaming herself for not protecting the girl she had grown to love. The parents into their grief. The father spent hours in his study, staring at the walls, unable to comprehend how his life had shattered so quickly. The mother barely spoke at all. When she did, her words carried the sharp edge of someone holding herself together by force. She replayed every moment from the past year, every conversation, every habit, every odd glance, to see how she had missed the danger. Her shame mixed with fury until she felt like she was being pulled apart from the inside. Meanwhile, the doctor tried to return to his normal routine, treating patients with a smile that grew strained. But people watched him differently now. Some avoided his office altogether. Others whispered as he passed. His colleagues questioned him privately. Every polite conversation felt heavy with suspicion. Though he tried to appear composed, the guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. In quiet moments, the truth pulled at him, her terrified eyes, the way her body went limp, the silence that followed. He saw her in every shadow, heard her voice in every empty room. Some nights he woke up choking, gasping for air, feeling her hands on his wrists even though she was long gone. He told himself he was being ridiculous. He told himself it had been an accident, but deep down he knew. And that knowledge was a weight he could not escape. The city watched as investigators pieced together what had happened. They examined the bruises, studied the room, and questioned every person connected to the girl. Slowly, the truth began to take shape, messy, painful, undeniable. And as it did, the doctor's carefully built world began to crumble. The case would go on to shake the community, divide families, and make people question the very systems they had trusted. But in those first days after the girl's death, the heart of the story was simple and devastating. A young woman was gone. Her parents were broken. A maid carried a guilt she didn't deserve. And the man who had sworn to heal had become the one who destroyed. The dust had settled by the time the courts gave their final word, yet the story of what happened inside that old Victorian home still clung to every corner of the city. People spoke about it as if it were a warning, something whispered to remind others that even the most polished families could hide the darkest secrets. Its name was no longer spoken with admiration or trust. It carried a weight now, a heaviness that no one expected when her life first began unraveling. In the days after the trial, she sat in her cell in complete silence, no longer the woman who once walked with confidence through polished hallways and well-lit rooms. She had been stripped of everything, her career, her home, her reputation, and as much as she tried to blame the world, the truth reached her in moments of stillness. She knew she had crossed a line she could never return from. The law had done its part, but her real punishment lived inside her, replaying itself through memory and regret. The court ruled her guilty of causing harm through neglect and manipulation, and though many argued she deserved far worse, her sentence still symbolized something important. For the first time in years, her image no longer protected her. People who had once feared her influence watched as she was led away in handcuffs, her head lowered, her hands trembling. Some felt relieved, some felt anger, but many felt confused. How could someone who seemed so capable, so intelligent, fall so deeply into obsession and control? It was a question that echoed across town, and one that even the investigators struggled to answer. Herself never gave a clear explanation, only fragments that hinted at her desire to be seen, respected, and adored in a way no one ever truly gave her. But none of it excused what she did. It only painted a picture of a woman who let power twist her, until she could no longer recognize right from wrong. George, on the other hand, spent the rest of his life trying to rebuild what was left of his family. The guilt never fully left him. He often wondered if he should have seen the signs earlier, if he could have protected his daughter before jealousy grew into something deadly. Friends told him he wasn't to blame, but when he looked at the empty space at the dinner table or opened the bedroom door that still smelled faintly of lavender, he knew a part of him would always believe he failed her. In court, he spoke with shaking hands as he described the slow destruction of his household. His voice cracked when he admitted that he didn't want vengeance. He only wanted the truth to be known, so no one else would ever fall into this trap of control. The community changed after the case. People began to question things they once accepted without a thought. Neighbors who used to greet each other with small smiles now looked closer, wondering what lay behind polite appearances. The newspapers printed article after article about the case, calling it one of the most disturbing events the town had seen in decades. Reporters dug into his career, into her relationships, into every tiny detail that hinted at the woman she truly was beneath the surface. Parents talked about how they would teach their children to speak up, to not ignore signs of manipulation or fear. Schools and hospitals quietly updated their policies, introducing new ways to report suspicious behavior. Even though the crime was over, its influence stretched far beyond the courtroom. There were debates that lasted for months. Some said was sick, that her obsession and emotional instability clouded her judgment. Others believed she knew exactly what she was doing and simply cared more about her own pride than the life she was responsible for. The arguments never reached a clear answer, but they opened discussions about mental health, power, and the thin line between control and care. People who once avoided talking about such things suddenly felt the need to confront them. The case became a lesson that no amount of education or success could guarantee morality. It showed that power, when abused, could turn even the person into someone capable of terrible acts. In the end, justice was delivered in the only way the law could give it, but the emotional damage remained long after the courtroom emptied. Lived out her sentence in a quiet facility far from the city she once tried to command. Her days blended, marked by the slow passing of time and the distant voices of people who no longer feared her. Sometimes she asked for news about the outside world, and sometimes she didn't speak at all. Her name faded from the headlines, then from conversations, until only the people directly affected by her actions remembered her clearly. But the child she hurt, the one whose life ended far too soon, became the heart of every discussion that followed. Her story was told in classrooms, in community centers, and in homes where parents tried to explain how someone so trusted could cause so much pain. Her memory urged people to pay closer attention, to speak up when something felt wrong, to understand that even gentle smiles could hide intentions that were anything but kind. Looking back, the tragedy forced the town to face parts of human nature that many preferred to ignore. It showed how fragile morality could be when mixed with pride, jealousy, and unchecked authority. It revealed how easy it was for someone to slip into darkness when their need for control grew stronger than their sense of responsibility. And it showed how important it was for people to stay connected, to watch out for one another, and to never assume that danger always comes from strangers. The story would not be forgotten. It left behind questions that lingered in the air long after she was gone, questions about power, about trust, and about how far a person might go when their world begins to crumble. But it also left behind a reminder that justice, though imperfect, still mattered. It reminded people that truth has a way of coming to light, even when someone tries to bury it behind charm and status. Years later, when people walked past the old Victorian home where it all began, they didn't see the polished exterior or the elegant windows. They saw the cracks beneath it, the same cracks that had existed in its heart long before anyone realized how deep they went. And in that way, the house became a symbol of everything the case had taught them. That darkness doesn't always appear with loud warnings. Sometimes it grows quietly, behind walls that look safe, inside people who seem untouchable. But eventually, it finds its way out. The town rebuilt itself, slowly and painfully. The families involved learned to live with the pieces left behind, and the story of, though tragic, became a tool for understanding the fragile balance between love, control, and morality. In the end, the lesson was simple but heavy. Power in the wrong hands could destroy lives, and no one was immune to the pull of jealousy or fear. Justice had come, but so had understanding, an understanding that would shape the way the town protected its own for generations to come.